I was standing on a staircase similar to this, about 2 steps higher. It was about 15 years ago, and we had just gone through our Palm Sunday processional at the first church that I served, Congregational Church of San Mateo. It was that glorious moment of all the revelry and the palms and the chaos. And now we were transitioning into the Passion. The Passion, since we're on this doorway, it's Palm Sunday, and we're on this doorway into Holy Week. Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday. And we were doing a dramatic reading. There had been 6 of us on the steps. 4 before me had read about Jesus' betrayal, his desertion, his mockery. And now it was just Pastor Jim and I, the senior minister. Pastor Jim finished reading his part, and then what we were instructed to do is we were to take a piece of the chancel area and strip it bare. Pastor Jim walked back to the farthest part of our sanctuary. And it was one of those long, long sanctuaries that there were about 400 people there on this day. Pastor Jim climbs up on the communion table and reaches for the tall cross that's about as big as our faux stained glass. Pastor Jim wears fantastic Italian shoes, leather shoes. I learned during my time with our home companion that yes, I need to pay attention to shoes, so I learned even back then, 15 years ago. And he's in these fantastic shoes. He's 6'3", and he's reaching as high up as he can to try and take down this gigantic wooden cross. And I'm holding my breath, wondering if I need to go back and help him. Is he going to be crushed by this? And he reaches up and he grabs it and he's trembling. And Pastor Jim's a strong, strong man. And he brings it down with a thud. And he takes a black piece of cloth and wraps it around the cross. And I couldn't breathe. I thought, oh my goodness, how have I missed this? We are still crucifying my Jesus. Does everybody else know this? And I had just missed it. And all of my years as a Christian, as I finally swung back in, as it was my 2nd year of seminary, and I had missed this moment that we are still crucifying my Jesus. That this wasn't just you all know this, right? This wasn't just 2,000 years ago. It was still happening today. 15 years ago, you remember we were at war in Iraq. Women's bodies were being sexualized to sell products. There were policies being made to not take care of Mother Earth. We were taking away other policies to care for those in need who were hungry and thirsty without food and clothing 15 years ago. Did everybody else know this? That we were crucifying God's dream? How had I missed this? So I'm having this profound internal shift in front of 400 people. Tears begin streaming from my eyes because not only am I grieving my Jesus being killed 2,000 years ago, I'm realizing in the moment that it's still happening. So Pastor Jim, right, has put the cross down, draped it in black, and he's beginning to walk down the long aisle out the entrance exit door, depending on what we're calling it today, yes? And there I stand at the top of the stairs. My heart has shattered. My world has imploded. Because all of a sudden I have this new understanding of who I'm going to be as a pastor, who I'm to be as a woman of God. I'm wondering if anyone else has noticed that this is happening in the room. Worship, of course, is not about me. Yes, come on, yes. I'm the finger that points us to the moon. I'm aware of that. Tears are coming down my face. They taught us in seminary never to cry in worship, right? Because then, who knows why. But so there I stand with my Bible. I've got one sentence to say. One. There's probably 5 words. I don't even remember what it was. Actually, I do remember what it was. And Jesus breathed his last breath. And I'm standing there. All I want to say is, y'all know this, right? Jesus is still being crucified. What are we going to do? Standing there, trying to muster the courage to look out into the congregation, because now streams of tears are coming down, and I'm wondering if this is going to turn into a full-blown Oprah cry, you know, when you... And I look out into the congregation, and when folks are uncomfortable, right, with tears or any kind of emotion, and you look at them, most people will look away if they're uncomfortable, right? Instead, I muster the courage to look to my left. And people paused and looked at me with such love. They didn't look away. And they began crying too. I look out to my right. Men and women are also beginning to cry. Tears. And I keep thinking, Jesus help me, Jesus help me, Jesus help me. At one sentence, that's all I've got to say, and then I can run down that aisle and be finished, right? So at that point, I look down the long aisle. And there's sunlight coming in because there's a doorway, there's an entryway, and then there's the outside. So there's this glorious sunlight. Pastor Jim goes in front of the sunlight, and he looks angelic. And he just stands regally, looking at me, sending this glorious, loving energy. And then Pastor Betsy, our commission minister for children, youth, and family, comes to the same doorway, and they talk to each other. And I can see there's an exchange happening. And then over the sound system, we hear Pastor Betsy's voice say, Cynthia can't pull it together to say her one sentence. Because she forgot to turn off her Madonna mic. So now we have the humor happening as well, right? So instead of my one sentence, I say, we're still crucifying Jesus. We're still crucifying Jesus. And I walked down that long aisleway with such love that we were sending one to another. Such love. Later I would learn at the staff meeting on Monday, the pastoral staff gathered to talk about my mental health, to make sure that I was doing okay. And I needed to remind my mentor that at that point I had passed all of my psychological evaluations. And yet when I shared that profound shift, that click, is as if the gears just went click. And my world made sense in a whole new way. They said, oh, we understand that. I said, you all knew that, right? That we're still crucifying my Jesus. And they had known that clarity that they had, right? And I share that story to remind ourselves. Thanks, y'all, for hearing it. I haven't been able to tell it for 15 years. I've needed that amount of time for it to live within me. Have you had those transformational moments? Hopefully not in front of 400 people, but have you had those moments, where something just goes click within you? And I needed time for it to live there, to remind myself of who I am as a person of God, of who we are as a people of God. So on this Palm Sunday, when we had that opportunity to engage in waving our palms, a little bit of chaos, yes, a little bit of fun, it's almost deceiving, isn't it? Because that was the first, some say, nonviolent protest march that people engaged in Jesus' time. They were waving their branches and they were singing their hosannas loudly. And here comes Jesus in this Gospel of Matthew, riding in on a mother donkey and her little colt. I don't know about you, but today I wanted a my Jesus, my God is bigger than your God. And he comes in on a donkey and a colt. Historians have said on the other side of town in Jerusalem, the military had gathered on their big stallions. I mean, I think of the Clydesdale, the Budweiser ones. I mean, that's what we want Jesus riding in on, right? Just this big animal that says, I am strong. Because that always goes real, right? Always isn't the correct word, my beloved congregation. Jesus rides in on this donkey and a little colt. In his day of militarism, when the empire ruled with their fear and their force, when they had gathered on the other side of Jerusalem, it's Passover. Jews are celebrating and remembering that they have been liberated, that they've been set free from all that tied them. So whenever they gathered, there is this possibility, there's an undercurrent of a revolt, of an uprising. And so the military folks were there with their big horses and their swords, letting everybody know that they're in control. And they will keep that control with their fear and their force. So if you've come today looking for a counter-narrative to Jesus' time and all that's going on in our world, here it is. Jesus rides in on a mothering, nursing donkey. Jesus comes in on a creature that can give birth to new life. Jesus comes in on a creature that can nourish its young, that can tend to and care for its family. Jesus, this one we are to follow, reminds us with this beautiful counter-narrative, helps us to remember in these times in which we live the importance of being birth givers, of mothering, of nourishing, of nurturing. It was risky for those folks to gather on that day. It could have gotten them killed. The empire had no trouble crucifying many thousands of different people who didn't show loyalty. So for them to shout Hosanna, isn't that, it's a glorious Hosanna. It just rolls off our tongues, doesn't it? And yet literally it means save us. That's the undertone there. That's the resistance that's happening. They are saying, save us. Depending on which historian we look at, 92 to 98% of the people were in utter poverty. They were hungry, they were thirsty, they were being taxed, the rich were getting richer on their backs. And they were saying, Jesus, save us from this. And the political and the religious leaders were colluding. They were being silent in the face of oppression, silent in the face of poverty and real needs. And yet they needed to march. They needed to gather together to remember that in their community they are stronger than they are on their own. And this threatened the powers that be. Do you remember a couple weeks ago I preached on Matthew 25? When did we see you hungry? When did we see you thirsty? When did we see you? Thank you all for some nods. What I failed to mention, a couple verses after that. Oh, so if you're visiting with us today, Matthew 25. It's about who are we going to be? Who are we as people of God? Folks that help those in need. And Jesus says, if you've helped them, then you've helped me. A couple verses after that, the religious and political leaders said, we need to kill him. We are too, they didn't say this, but we're threatened by what he's saying, by taking care of those in need. So here we are on this Palm Sunday, this doorway to Holy Week where we journey with Jesus. It's a challenging time to enter into Holy Week when Jesus will meet his betrayal, his desertion, and ultimately his crucifixion. And I invite you to be intentional about how you walk into Holy Week. That what is it that Spirit asking you to let go of, to release? I appreciated our young ones' wisdom and clarity. I got too much junk. What is it that God's asking you to let go of? And it is possible to go from Palm Sunday to Easter. It's possible to do that journey, yes? And yet the amazing thing about Jesus and Holy Spirit and God is one of the wisdoms and the truths, those things that we need to let go of, God will keep bringing those to our doorstep, asking them to look at it, asking us to look at that, circling back. So let me finish up. Holy Week. I hope you'll pay attention to 3 different pieces. The first is, yes, we're grieving Jesus 2,000 years ago, being crucified. This enemy of the state, this innocent man. And yet there are 2 more pieces of that as well. The ruling political powers of his day that tortures and executed him, that sacrificed the weak and the blameless to protect their own status and power. That's a lot in itself to wrap our heads around. I hope you also pay attention to what things in your life do you need to untie. What counter-narratives need to be released so that you can experience new life. And if you're really brave, and this is going to take some of our spiritual muscles together, are we willing to ask ourselves, how am I participating? How are we participating in the desertion, the mockery, the betrayal, the crucifixion of Jesus? Y'all, I don't invite us into that reality so that it feels heavy. Rather, it's the reality that we would be in touch with our power to bring about new life. That we would understand. Let's be clear, yeah? All of our hands are dirty. Yeah? Yeah? This isn't the get out of jail free card. Stay with me. Although y'all have that. This is the reality of us having choices. My family and I having choices what businesses we give our monies to. Thank you all for sharing your spiritual treasures here, your financial treasures in this place, as we then go out and be God's hands and feet. That we as a people of God have a whole lot of power in tipping us towards God's dream. So that awareness is important. And then the third piece, how are you participating? Where is Spirit calling you to be one of those new life givers? Where is Jesus or God or Spirit or mystery, whatever you're naming that today, calling you to be someone who participates in someone else's new life and resurrection? That's dipping into our power and our empowerment about participating in this parade that we constantly march in and day out. And that's that glimpse of Easter that's on its way, that new life and resurrection, that we co-create that together. Y'all still with me? And this is what it looks like. This justice creating, this new life creating, this resurrection creating that we do together. This is the wisdom of Arundhati Roy. She says this: Our strategy should be not only to confront empire, but to lay siege to it, to deprive it of oxygen, to shame it, to mock it, with our art, with our music, with our literature, with our stubbornness, our joy, our brilliance, our sheer relentlessness, and our ability to tell our own stories. Stories that are different from the ones we've been brainwashed to believe. The corporate revolution will collapse if we refuse to buy what they are selling. Their ideas, their version of history, their wars, their weapons, their notions of inevitability. Remember this: we be many and they be few. They need us more than we need them. And another world is not only possible, she is on her way. And on a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Amen.